Jordan Peterson. You gotta be living under a rock to not have at least seen him somewhere. But if you don't know him, he's a Canadian psychologist, author, and many more. Firstly, he obtained his 2 bachelor degrees for political science and psychology, and then a PhD in clinical psychology right after that. Then Jordan started his career by being an assistant professor at fucking Harvard, and then a full-time professor at the University of Toronto. Not the same punch, but I guess it's Canadian. Okay, anyway, the point is that the man is smart. But how did we end up seeing him mostly on podcasts? Well, right after he started appearing in everyone's phone, he began going to the media networks. But it was like battles for him, when the other side had the power to represent him the way they wanted. And he won some battles like the Channel 4.
Ha, gotcha.
Then lost some battles like the Vice one. And then he had that conversation with Joe Rogan.
We've been thinking about how to handle the media, and one hypothesis being, don't do interviews that will be edited.
Which is why I saw this as reverse psychology from a psychologist and began editing his latest appearance on the Lex Friedman podcast. I ended up figuring out why it's impossible to summarize, but to get to there, first we need to answer the underlying question there. Why even summarize podcasts in the first place? Well, as we know, podcasts are more than a decade old, which makes the sheer number of podcasts, not just podcast episodes, enormous. Podcasts should exist, don't get me wrong. I will answer that when I get to Jordan. But for now, the main problem that I see with podcasts is time efficiency. I mean, wouldn't you like to get about 80% of key points from podcast episodes in about 20 and more often less time? Not wasting time listening to the filler content of most episodes that just makes you zone out, so that the podcast just becomes a background noise while you drift down the river of your own thoughts. There's also a risk of not liking that episode, which can be found in the 3rd minute of the summarized video and not the 15th of the actual podcast episode. Also, if you like the summarized episode and you want to find out more about it, just go to the real episode. I will leave them in the description, just in case. Now that I have got this Trojan horse of explaining why the summarization of podcasts is good, while secretly advertising my channel, go subscribe to the average podcast listener, we can finally answer why are Jordan's appearances impossible to summarize. Well, I partially answered this at the beginning. The man is smart. Smart in many ways, but I'll give you 2 of them that are connected. First is his knowledge of the English language and the eloquence in expressing his thoughts. If you take a look at the table done by Cambridge University Press, an educated adult knows about 15,000 active words, while other sources go from 20,000 active to 40,000 passive words. Well, what the fuck is active and passive vocabulary? An active vocabulary consists of words we have learned and actually use when speaking or writing, while on the other hand, a passive vocabulary refers to the words we've assimilated but not have been able to use. A guy like Jordan, who's a public speaker on a regular basis, is an author, and was also a professor at the most prestigious universities. Potentially, he has an active vocabulary that surpasses an average Joe's passive vocabulary. There's also an understanding that passive words require more energy, because you are assimilating what that word is by the context of the sentence. That's why school was hard. You do not know how to use the word, yet you are assimilating its meaning through a sentence of the subject that you're learning about. And if Jordan is using words that you've never heard of, you will need to put more effort into listening what he's saying. And after a long day of work, I doubt you have the energy to do so. I know I don't, that's why I'm making this shit. And the second thing is that with his efficiency in using the right word, he can spark up many more great and complex topics in less time, making that 80% of key points rule get thrown out of the window because there's just too many key points. I can't even get some jokes in, that's a lie. But I thought of 2 different ways I can conquer this impossible problem. The first being just to simplify his talk, so that people like to whom English is a second language don't have to Google every second what the fucking meaning of the spoken word is. I'm also not defending idiocracy here. Go and learn these words. But let me go back to the problem of simplifying his talk. You would have to use more simplified words to explain the same thing that he said with a few words, with fewer exact words, which makes the summary even longer than the actual part you're summarizing. See, the previous point I made was that most of other episodes have filler content, so that actual meaningful parts of that episode can be cut down and said in a shorter period of time, while on the other hand, Jordan's appearances is the lowest time can go, if you don't want to cut down way too much of his content from the actual episode. Okay, but my second approach to the problem is to make a couple of segment videos, only summarizing segments of the podcast episode, by focusing on explaining through visualization of what he's saying while adding my own views on it, knowing that this will take time and not secure that this will pass. If there's like 20 of you that want to see this, comment down below. If you like to see silly podcast summaries or even these kind of videos, be sure to subscribe to the average podcast listener, and also I would honestly like to see your comments down below. Anyway, check out the Javier summary here.